Good morning, everybody. Here we go with the Wifey Wake Up podcast. And today, another special topic, another important topic, as you could tell by my hand gestures there. And it is, were you raised to distrust men? Of course, this is for the ladies out there, but the guys, of course, you might want to listen in because this will provide a lot of clues as to why you're having certain interactions with women. So, ladies, were you raised to distrust men, and how to build a strong, supportive marriage today? As always, what I share here on the Wifey Wake Up podcast is based on my we're almost there, 24 years of a successful marriage with my husband, and all the things that I've learned that I wish I had known earlier, and I'm passing on to you so you don't have to go through the hard times, hopefully. And I learned some interesting things today as I was additionally researching for this podcast. And what I found out, because my original idea for this podcast was what we are faced with, especially as women, but the results are that the men are facing this as well. What are we faced with as a result of laying in the bed that our mothers and fathers prepared for us? And when I looked into some of the data, of course, many of us know that the divorce data is that nearly 50% of marriages end in divorce. And of course, it's around 40-some% for marriages, first-time marriages. It jumps up to much more for second marriages. And I think it's like nearly 75% for marriage number 3. So obviously it depends on which number you're at. Also, is it a religiously based marriage or couple? The stats will vary a little bit. And even by race, I was really interested. I'll share the article that I found that really laid a lot of that out. It's so interesting. But there are basic principles that we can apply that really can improve our chances, not just chances, but our likelihood, because we are in control of what we can do in a marriage. And oftentimes, so much what we do, and I'm speaking to women especially here, what we do can really influence how the man responds to us. And so this is so interesting, is what I found out. So of course, along with all the basic divorce stats, did you know that it's the baby boomer generation that actually currently has the highest rate of divorce, and is the highest rate of divorce in U.S. history? And baby boomers, for those who are not clear, are those born between 1946 and 1964. And as I was reading these stats, I was like, wow, this even enhances what I was going to previously say even more, which is, my parents were part of that generation. My husband's parents were part of that generation. And you may recall, you may be aware that generation was really the first generation to be raised with women's lib, with I believe that was second wave feminism. And they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. And so if you're of my generation, of course, the later Gen X's, millennials, Gen Z are being brought up in that dogma as well. And what we're seeing is the baby boomers, that they're, I think, suffering the fallout from that thought process. Now, I want to back up a moment, because I am not totally bashing feminism, although for the most part, I do think it's very destructive these days. Early wave feminism definitely brought an awareness about women's rights that was really necessary. And case in point, my grandmother was married to someone who was extremely abusive. And in that early era, so it would have been the early 70s, no, actually it was the mid to later 60s. I'm going to have to correct that in my notes. She was able to not only divorce this very abusive person, but she was able to get a job that paid a lot better. She was able to buy a home. She was able to buy a car. The only thing she wasn't able to do, from my conversations with her, is she was not able to purchase car insurance without the co-signing of a husband. And so there were still a few limitations. And this is very interesting too, because since I've also learned that women's rights really depended very greatly on the state that they lived in. So, for example, I was observing this one comment, the thread of comments, and about women talking about, whether they thought that women really truly had equal rights at this point or not. And there was some very interesting perspective, and a woman chimed in. My grandma with her grandmother was able to purchase a car in the 1920s and have a bank account and so forth. And someone else chimed in, my grandmother had the money, wanted to buy property, but she wasn't able to buy property. And so the former, the woman whose grandmother bought the car, I believe was in Iowa, and also inherited property, was able to own property, and the other woman was in Alabama, and her mother was not able to purchase the property even though she could prove income. And someone really pointed out something very interesting in the chat as well and chimed in. It was a man who said, just because I have the money doesn't mean that a bank is going to approve my loan either. So it may not have been based upon even that she was a woman. So what I'm talking about specifically is, and I think we need to delineate, is whether it's sex-based or whether there's some other factors. So before I get too far off on other tangents, I want to emphasize that this era, the baby boomers, again, were the first generation that were really brought up, that it was really integrated the new wave feminism and, being the strong, independent woman, sexual liberation. And I think it went too far personally. And I think we're seeing the fallout of that. And just to reiterate, like I said at the beginning, I think it's important to reiterate, we are seeing that the baby boomer generation has the highest rate of divorce in U.S. history. That is of any generation currently, they are experiencing the highest rate of divorce. And they're saying these studies, and I'll put the link to this article. It's based on a number of studies that the subsequent Gen X and millennials have a lesser rate of divorce, but I think time will tell really where they fare. Millennials especially are marrying later, and so we'll see as they get further down the road. So again, referencing back to my grandmother, she definitely benefited from the early waves of feminism that really made it possible for women across the board, not just in certain states, to have bank accounts, be able to own property and so forth. And I think it's important to note too that in our family, my husband's aunt was actually a part of the Wilmer 8, and I have a link to that Wikipedia article, which is very interesting. It was in 1977. It was a group of 8 women who protested, who made a strike in front of the bank in Wilmer, Minnesota, which is a bigger city, but still very rural Minnesota back in the late 70s. And in that area of Minnesota, it's very flat. And so they were striking in well below zero weather. And that was for equal pay. They were actually, it doesn't say this from what I recall in the Wikipedia article, but from what I've heard through family, is that these bank tellers were training the men who would then end up replacing them or surpass them at the bank. So the men would come in as new hires, and the women would be training the men, and very soon the men would be making more money than them, even though it was the women that were training them, and they were not being promoted. And so it was about equal pay, or there are many terms, right? And for what they were specifically going for, but they basically wanted to be paid, equally to men for the equal work that they were doing. And that really made an impact at that time. And there's so much to say on this topic. So, okay, let's see. Talked about that. There's so much. I got to make notes, you guys, so I stay on track. Otherwise, I can go off in so many directions. Okay, so getting back to this baby boomer generation, they are experiencing the highest divorce rates in U.S. history and compared to any other generation. And we'll see how the other generations fare as time goes by, but realizing that many of us who are adults are the product of baby boomer parents. My husband, both my husband and I are products of baby boomer parents. He from the earlier era of baby boomer parents and me from the later era. And so he was brought up much more, I would say, classically, traditionally. And my parents were in the later era, which was definitely well steeped in the women's lib type environment. And I was definitely brought up, to be the strong, independent woman. And I am woman, hear me roar, which I quickly found out does not work well when you're trying to have a good, healthy relationship. Being a strong, independent woman is not synonymous, does not work within having an interdependent, healthy relationship. And I had a lot of learning to do. I found that how I was thinking was really conflicting greatly with my relationship, and especially my husband, who, like I said, was brought up in more of that traditional fashion. And I want to emphasize too that I think that feminism has gone too far. Like, the mission was accomplished. And what happens is when you get in a battle-like state, you're worrying over things. You can get stuck in that mode. And whether it's a warrior mode, maybe it's a caretaking mode, if you're not aware, you can stay in that mode. But I don't think there's the battle anymore. And what happens is when you get stuck in a mode, you look for the next issue to take care of or to fight over, and don't realize that the battle is actually over. And I don't want to too quickly get to my conclusion here, because I think there are more points to make. Part of my point is that, my husband was brought up, he's a Gen Xer, and I'm like the first millennial generation of the millennial generation. So I'm close enough where I understand the Gen X mentality and kind of culture. But I think what comes of that is he was such an, raised by the early baby boomers that, of course, in the zeitgeist, there was the women's lib mantra, right? And I think we're at a point that we've gotten the point, right? And I think what makes my husband a really wonderful man isn't because he was raised in that environment, isn't because that was the mantra he was hearing around him. I think he's a wonderful man that I can't even imagine. I've never met a man that is more supportive of his wife in her personal growth, in my well-being, than him. And I don't think it's because that dogma has been stuffed down his throat. I think it's because he has wonderful parents, and that he was raised to treat others how you would like to be treated. That especially when you're married, that person is now a part of you, and you wouldn't treat that person poorly any more than, unless you were a sick person. A person who's sick, then they would self-mutilate, right? If they're not well. But that he has that truly wonderful mentality underneath it all is the reason why he treats me so well. Not because he was berated by the mantras of feminism. And I think that's the point that is really missed, is that if we all just adhered to some basic moral values, that we would treat each other well without having to raise a particular banner, political, social banner. And so I didn't say it, I have it in my notes, so I didn't say it from the beginning, but this is really particularly for women, is especially if you're having conflict in your relationship, to really assess what was the teaching that you grew up with. And this is not a call to being a victim. This is not a call to blame your parents. This is a call of awareness. This is a call to action as well, to be aware of how you were brought up and whether that is the truth. I, for example, like I mentioned, was brought up by parents that were the later baby boomer generation. They're part of the statistic that I mentioned earlier, that baby boomers are getting the highest rate of divorces in U.S. history. And I certainly learned a lot of these principles from them, right? That, like I said, the be the strong, independent woman, and you probably did too. And I just want to emphasize, I'm happy with how I turned out. I know that they play a very large role in who I am today, and in that history, whether I liked what they taught or not. But I think the saving grace was that I questioned things. I never took, or hardly ever, let's say, took things at the surface and just, I always questioned, what is the motive behind this? And you may have as well grown up to think in these following ways. And if you can say yes to any of these, and you're having difficulty either establishing a happy, healthy relationship or maintaining one, I really encourage you to dive deeper. And those messages would be, if you were taught to not trust a man, even though you grew up around healthy, dependable man. And a clue to that would be, to be the strong, independent woman was the underlying tone to that was, you can't depend on another person. You can never depend on particularly a man, and men are to be distrusted. And I realize there's two sides of that coin. And oftentimes we as women need to realize that other side of the coin. A similar message would be, you need to keep your finances separate from your husband, even before you know who that man might be. And that is, again, same coin kind of situation, but different side, right? And it is the flip side is the message underlying that is to not trust a man. And automatically, if you're taught to not trust, you're not taught the skills to be able to learn how to discern if he is a trustworthy man in that way. And third, and this is certainly not these are not the only examples, but I really want to, I think these are the main ones to pay attention to. And if you were taught that men and women are equal, as in they are the same, you might have some of these, you probably have some of these teachings that are really working against your establishing a happy, healthy relationship and maintaining a happy, healthy relationship. And ladies, I know this rubs wrong, okay? This is from 20 plus years of marriage. This is from fighting it in my own self, in my own marriage. And what I found is that these teachings really work against having a successful relationship. And it doesn't mean that you have to don the apron and just be stuck in the kitchen. You can still be who you are, but recognize that how much we were taught to be separate from men, how much we were taught to oppose men, how much we were taught, instead of understanding what our strength is as a feminine woman, what our innate strengths are, that we were taught to be like a man. And automatically it's like two ends of a magnet, two magnets that you're trying to put together, two positive ends or two negative ends, they're going to repel each other. And so if you don't have that balance between you, in you, and between you of feminine and masculine, you are going to repel each other. So what I want to end with is emphasize that I think the women's lib, the feminine liberation movement, women's liberation movement has met their objective. And the thing is when you get stuck in a mode, there are women who are stuck in battle mode. And we as the next generation have absorbed that way of being. But I don't think we need to fight anymore, and particularly not fight against men. We need to understand our strengths as women. Hint, that's going to be another podcast, how you can be strong as a woman in your own femininity. Hello, Melissa. Thank you. And how we can work together. It's a time to start working together. It's a time to put that sword in the sheath as women. And yes, Melissa, we need to fight alongside men if we're going to fight at all, that we need to be on the same team together. And this is not only going to serve our marriages, it's going to serve our families, and it's going to serve our community. And instead of us being at war with one another, we can build so much more together. This article was so interesting, and one of them was how much higher the divorce rates are when you associate, when you have friends who also are divorced or are divorcing. It was something like 75 times greater that the couple, and even one layer removed also, would be affected. And isn't that so true? I mean, our parents taught us, like if your friends would jump off a bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge? And I know some of those old sayings they seem so archaic, they seem so silly, but they're so true. And it is really important who we hang around with, especially today, who we listen to, what podcasts are we listening to, what music are we listening to, and what is that telling us about how to have relationships. So I hope that these younger generations, Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs, as they're getting married, that the statistics are truly moving in that direction where there's less and less divorce. I'm crossing my fingers, but I'm still putting out this call to action that we can work together. Yes, Melissa, and stop the male hate. Absolutely. It's coming back at us. What's happening, what I'm seeing and hearing in the dating community and post-divorce community is that men are fed up now. And the thing is, the women are going to be on the losing end and are starting to be on even more the losing end of that. And what I mean by losing is men are just going, enough. I've had enough. I can be single and have fun. And I know women are saying that too. But for those many who want to be in a loving, healthy, successful relationship, maybe those of younger generations who might have looked to a little bit older man in particular, and he's just like, I've had enough of dating. Maybe he hasn't even married yet. He's like, I've had enough, and they're calling it off, or they're stepping out of the game, is what I'm saying. And women in particular. So first of all, the men are tired of that, of the confrontation that comes from a strong, independent woman. Now, mind you, I'm right here. I'm not the weak, the proverbial, what you imagine what would be the opposite of a strong, independent woman. I am here speaking to you. My husband is encouraging me to do these podcasts. Looks like my internet is weak. So my internet went out for a moment here. They're putting in cable or fiber, and every once in a while, I think they're connecting wires and we get disconnected for a moment. So hopefully that doesn't break up too much. But anyways, my point was that, it isn't the strong, independent woman. The opposite or the alternative is not just to be locked up in a room, okay? You can still be who you are and want to be, but instead working in partnership with a man instead of being independent, right? You can become interdependent and work together. There's so much strength in that. And I'll say this again because my internet was going out. My husband supports me and encourages me in doing this 100%. And so there are men, I think there are many men like that out there like that, but it takes the two of you to work together to bring out the best in each other. So this is really a call to action. It's women, is dive deep, go inside and understand, observe that many of us were taught to not trust men. And just on that one principle, if we are not trusting men, whether it's justified or not, I think many of us were taught to not trust men as the fallout from what some women truly did experience. Like my grandmother, for example, was in a very abusive relationship. And thank God I wasn't innately kind of reactively taught to distrust men. I was certainly taught by the dogma of feminism to not trust men. Yes, Melissa, I found that men are very receptive also, especially when you just talk to them like an adult. And that if you just investigate that one thing, where is it that I don't trust men or was taught to distrust men? And you can really have an epiphany and really turn it around. Yes, they are happy for women to join their cause. So, what I'm calling for you to do and join me is, if you were taught to be that warrioress, it doesn't mean that the alternative is to be a weak person. As another point in fact, I've been trained by my husband for 20 some years in martial arts. He's not looking for a weak woman. He's looking for a strong partner. And if you know that you have that warrior mentality, redirect it. Change the direction in which you are applying that energy, and don't apply it to the men in your life, and particularly the one that you say that you love. Put that sword in the sheath. Only take it out when it's absolutely necessary. Much more can be done these days by working in peace together rather than instinctively looking for the next battle. Look at where you can be a cause for peace, but not through having another battle. And we will touch upon in another podcast tuning into your true womanly feminine strength, where that lies. It's not in being more like a man. Is really capturing and bringing out that true feminine power. And strength. I think strength is a better word for that, but it can be really confused. Anyways, at the risk of going off on another tangent, that is for another day. Melissa, it was nice to see you in the chat. Have a wonderful day. Take care, everybody. Please like, comment, subscribe. Would love to hear your thoughts, men and women. And I'm going to put this out there too. Women, if you see men chime in the chat who seem, well, pissed off, they are, okay? And it's not our job necessarily to fix them, but we can decide in our personal relationships how we're going to be and who we're going to be. And I think it's time to change the tone. So join me. Please join me in doing that. There are wonderful, wonderful men out there ready to be in partnership with you to have a wonderful relationship. And I really hope that for everyone. Please like, comment, subscribe, share this with a friend. There's a rooster, by the way, just chiming in. You're probably hearing that. And please share it with a friend that you think would enjoy this. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.